Dad, this is too much for you now. I will take care of the property. That single sentence shattered 3 decades of my work and sacrifice. My own son, the same kid I once carried on my shoulders, the one whose tuition I covered without a second thought, looked straight at me and tossed me aside like I was some useless piece of junk. He honestly believed I would just fade into the background, another worn-out old man with nothing left to fight for. But he miscalculated. Pride comes before the fall, and betrayal has a price. He had no clue what kind of storm was waiting for him. Before we continue, please subscribe to stay updated on our latest stories. The smell of barbecue smoke drifted up through the pines around our old family cabin, mingling with the sound of laughter and the clink of bottles. We were celebrating Steve's 35th birthday that weekend, and for a short while, life felt perfect. Everyone had made it out. Steve, his wife Michelle, their kids running wild by the lake, and even my brother Bob, who'd made the long drive in from the city. I stood by the grill, turning steaks, while I watched my grandson chasing fireflies in the fading glow of sunset. This was exactly what all those long hours and years of work had been for. Moments like this. The cabin I bought 5 years earlier so we'd have a retreat, the business I built from nothing that gave us security, the rental homes that guaranteed the kids would have their college funds covered. It all led to this evening. "Dad, those steaks smell amazing," Steve called as he came over with 2 cold beers. He handed me one and clinked bottles with a smile. Just like when I was a kid. His voice had that warmth I remembered from his younger days. No edge, no agenda. Just a son enjoying time with his father. It filled me with pride. I grinned, thinking back to those lean years when we camped on shoestring budgets but made the best of it anyway. "Your mother used to joke I was better at grilling than running a company," I said. "Good thing I figured out how to build both a fire and a business." Steve chuckled, though a thoughtful look crept into his eyes, the same one he had when he was little and trying to puzzle out homework. "Actually, Dad, I've been wanting to talk about the business." That was when Michelle appeared, sliding an arm around his waist like she'd been waiting for her cue. "We have, actually," she added smoothly. Something about her timing felt staged, but I brushed the thought off. Maybe I was just being suspicious in my old age. I raised an eyebrow and took a sip of beer. "All right, what's on your minds?" "Well," Steve began, his tone light, "you've carried the weight of this company and those properties for 3 decades. Don't you think it's time you enjoyed the rewards instead of the stress?" He waved his bottle as he spoke, full of energy, while Michelle nodded along like she was applauding from the wings of a stage. A breeze whispered through the trees, and I could hear the kids shrieking with joy as they caught their first fireflies. "Look around," Michelle chimed in, her voice sugar-sweet and persuasive. "This is what life should be. Family, peace, no late-night calls from tenants or construction headaches." I studied her expression. Her smile was flawless, but her eyes had that sharp gleam I'd seen in contractors who lowballed the bid only to double it later. I gave a slow nod. They weren't wrong. The late nights and endless paperwork had been wearing me down. "Every builder knows when it's time to hand the tools to the next generation," I said carefully. "So what exactly are you proposing?" I asked, though deep down I already knew. Steve's face lit up, boyish excitement flashing, but underneath it was hunger, the kind a man gets when he sees prime land up for grabs. "Let me take it all over, Dad. The business, the rentals, everything. You trained me. I can handle it. And you? You can finally travel, pick up hobbies, maybe even start dating again." His words lingered in the evening air, while around us the party carried on, unaware of the shift happening by the grill. "I already spoke with the lawyers," Michelle added softly, but with that efficient tone of hers. "It's just a power of attorney transfer. Simple, straightforward." A knot of unease formed in my gut, but I pushed it aside. This was family. This was my son offering to shoulder the load. I looked at Steve, confident, capable. He'd been running things alongside me for 2 years, and truth be told, he was good at it. Maybe it was time. Maybe they were right. "I've always said a smart builder knows when the foundation is ready for the next story," I murmured. "You know what?" I surprised myself as the words came out. "Maybe you are right. Maybe it is time." The grin that spread across Steve's face was wide, but what caught my eye was Michelle giving his arm a quick squeeze, almost like claiming victory. "Really, Dad? You mean it?" Yeah, I said slowly. Let's do it. I cannot keep mixing concrete forever. We shook hands right there beside the grill, father and son, and I thought I was giving him a gift, my hard-earned legacy, and stepping into a peaceful retirement. The steak sizzled, the family laughed, and for a moment it felt like everything was exactly as it should be. What I did not realize was that I had just placed a wrecking ball in their hands and given them free rein to swing it. The morning light poured through the cabin windows, painting the kitchen in a soft gold. Bob and I sat at the old wooden table, sipping coffee and working through the Sunday crossword together. It was one of those quiet, ordinary moments that made all the years of sweat and labor worthwhile. Two brothers sharing the kind of peace we rarely got. 7 across, Bob muttered, tapping his pen. Expert on foundations. 9 letters. I grinned, lifting my mug. Could be architect. Though in my trade, I would say, the fellow who shows up after everything is already falling apart. Bob barked a laugh and shook his head. 30 years in construction, and you still talk like you were just swinging a hammer. That is because, at the heart of it, that is all it really is, I said. Work done with your own hands, something solid to show for it. You can dress it up with titles and business cards, but at the end of the day, it comes down to honest labor. Before he could answer, the kitchen door opened. Steve walked in, and the man I saw was nothing like the son who had clinked bottles with me the night before. The warmth was gone, replaced by a look I knew from boardrooms and job sites when deals turned cutthroat. Morning, Dad, Uncle Bob. His tone was sharp, clipped, professional, the same voice he used when talking down subcontractors who were running late. Bob raised his eyes from the crossword, picking up on the shift right away. Morning, Steve. Sleep all right? Fine. Steve poured himself coffee with quick, precise movements. Then he turned to me. Dad, we need to go over the timeline for the transition. I frowned, caught off guard. Just last night we had been celebrating. Now he was talking like a lawyer at a closing. Timeline? Son, we shook hands on this barely 12 hours ago. What is the rush? He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, his whole posture screaming ownership, as if the kitchen already belonged to him. The rush is about efficiency. No sense dragging things out. Bob stopped scribbling on the puzzle. His eyes narrowed as he studied Steve, and I saw the concern starting to form. I already contacted the bank this morning, Steve continued, matter of fact. They will need your signature on a few more documents. Business accounts, property deeds, nothing complicated, routine procedure. A chill crept up my back. Hold on. You told me it was just a simple power of attorney. Steve gave me a thin smile, all surface and no warmth. It was the same smile I had seen from contractors when they explained why the bill suddenly doubled. That was just the start, Dad. To make this official, everything needs to be transferred completely. A clean break. Clean break of what exactly? Bob snapped, his voice carrying that sharp edge I had not heard since we were kids about to get into a scrap. Steve barely looked at him, irritation flashing across his face like Bob was nothing more than background noise. Uncle Bob, this is between Dad and me. The hell it is, Bob shot back, dropping his pen with a sharp crack against the table. This is family, and something stinks here. I studied my son carefully. The mask he had worn so well was slipping, and what peeked through made my stomach knot. Or maybe it had always been there and I had just chosen not to see it. Look, Steve said, his patience fraying. This is simple. Dad is getting older. The business needs fresh leadership. It is time for a complete transfer, not a slow handoff, complete. My voice came out quieter than I expected. And what exactly does that mean for me? He met my eyes, and in that moment I saw something that froze my blood. It was the look of a man who already considered the fight over, the prize claimed. It means that once we are back in the city, you will need to pack your things and move out. The house is tied to the business. It is part of the assets. The room went dead silent. Even the birds outside seemed to fall quiet, like the whole world was listening. Bob shot up from his chair, rage boiling over. Are you out of your damn mind? That is his house! He built it with his bare hands. I raised my hand, stopping him before he could go further. Something inside me had shifted, like gears finally locking into place. The confusion was gone. In its place was a clarity I had not felt in years. No, Bob, I said, steady as stone. Let him finish. I want to hear every word my son has to say. Steve's expression hardened completely. The mask was gone. What I am saying is that it is time for you to step away from everything. The business, the properties, the house. It all comes as one package. You wanted retirement? Well, this is retirement. The words hung in the kitchen like smoke after a fire. My own flesh and blood, then the boy I raised and trusted, had just told me to walk away from the very life I had built. Bob was shaking with fury, but I stayed perfectly still. Inside me, something was forming, cold, sharp, and unbreakable. I hear you, son, I said finally, my voice calm but heavy with finality. I hear you loud and clear. Steve leaned back from the counter wearing that cold, self-satisfied grin I had seen before, the one he always flashed after closing a deal. He looked like a man already counting money that wasn't even his yet. Good talk, Dad, he said, his voice soaked with fake warmth. Glad we're all in agreement. He started for the door, but stopped to glance back at us, his smile stretched wider, showing teeth. Michelle and I are driving back to the city this afternoon to get things moving. Enjoy your last day at the cabin. The door shut with a soft click, but it landed in my chest like the slam of a coffin lid. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. Morning sunlight still poured through the windows, but it felt cold now. Across the table, Bob's face had turned bright red, his fists knotted so tight his knuckles were white. That little son of a bitch, he burst out, slamming his palm on the table hard enough to rattle the cups. After everything you've done for him. The ungrateful, conniving. Bob, I cut him off quietly, raising my hand. My voice was calm, but inside, something was grinding like a cement mixer turning wet concrete. Let me think. I closed my eyes, letting years of memories rise up like old photographs. 32 years back, buying that first lot with money saved from endless double shifts, the raw blisters on my palms from mixing concrete by hand because I couldn't afford a machine. Nights at the kitchen table with a dull pencil, sketching out blueprints for a future that seemed too far to reach. I saw little Steve again, 5 years old, clumsy in a hard hat 2 sizes too big, helping me put up drywall. 8 years old, learning how to read a level. 12, asking me how to calculate square footage. Every patient lesson, every shared skill, every moment I thought I was building his future, only to realize it had all been leading to this betrayal. You want to know the part that cuts deepest? I asked, opening my eyes to meet Bob's. What's that? I built 12 rental properties with these hands. I held them up, tracing the scars and calluses like lines on a map. 12. Each one took months of 16-hour days. I still remember the first foundation. I mixed that concrete until my back nearly broke. Bob nodded slowly. He'd been there for some of those early projects. He knew what those scars meant. I started with nothing, Bob. No trust fund, no rich parents, no easy path, just grit and a willingness to outwork every man in sight. Every nail I drove, every wall I raised, every roof I put up, it was all for my family, for him. I stood and walked to the window. The lake shimmered in the morning sun, the same lake where yesterday my grandson had been chasing fireflies. I put Steve through college, $120,000, not even counting his rent, his car, those spring break vacations to Cancun. I remember, Bob said, his voice softer now. I gave him his first job at my company. I taught him everything I knew. Paid for his wedding, $35,000 in one day because Michelle had to have her special moment. The numbers poured out like nails in a coffin. Down payment on their house, $50,000. His business degree he never finished, $40,000. His failed startup, $25,000. And now, my voice dropped to a low growl. Now he thinks he can walk in and take it all, like I'm some senile old man who can't tell a Phillips from a flathead screwdriver. I turned back to Bob, and whatever he saw in my face made him straighten up. There's one thing Steve doesn't understand about his old man, I said. You don't last 30 years in construction without learning how to deal with people who try to screw you over. Bob leaned forward, catching that tone in my voice, the one I used when a contractor tried to shortchange me on materials or when a client thought they could duck out on a bill. So what's the plan? I sat back down, calm now, like a man who's already made up his mind. The foundation of this family business has my name carved into it, not his, and it's about time he remembered that. I picked up my phone and scrolled through until I found a name I hadn't used in years. Remember Jim Patterson? The lawyer who drafted our incorporation papers? Yeah, Bob said, a slow grin spreading across his face. Well, Jim's about to have a busy Monday. I set the phone down, a thin smile tugging at my mouth. It wasn't the smile of a proud father. It was the smile of a builder who just spotted shoddy work and decided it was time to show what real craftsmanship looked like. You see, Bob, there's something about construction Steve never understood. Before you put up something new, sometimes you have to tear down what's already there, and when it comes to demolition... I paused, letting the silence hang heavy. No one swings a sledgehammer better than the man who laid the first brick. Instead of heading straight back from the cabin, I steered my truck downtown. Jim Patterson's law office sat in one of those old brick buildings that had stood through decades of city growth. Solid, dependable, built to last. The kind of structure that reminded me why I trusted Jim in the first place. He was already waiting when I walked in, the power of attorney papers laid out across his mahogany desk like evidence at a trial. Jim had been my lawyer for 15 years, guiding me through everything from incorporation paperwork to real estate purchases. If anyone could cut through the fog of this mess, it was him. So, Jim said, pushing his glasses higher on his nose as I sat across from him, tell me exactly what went on at the cabin. I laid it all out. The birthday celebration, Steve's warm pitch about me enjoying retirement, my decision to sign, and then the gut punch the next morning when he told me I'd be moving out of my own house. Jim listened closely, jotting notes, not saying a word until I was done. Then he leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. Good news first, he said, tapping his pen against the stack of papers. You haven't actually signed away ownership of anything yet. Power of attorney lets Steve act in your name, but it doesn't give him outright possession. Titles, deeds, and assets stay in your hands unless separate transfers are filed. A weight I hadn't realized I was carrying slipped off my shoulders. And the bad news? Jim's expression hardened. The bad news is this still gives him teeth. He can sign contracts, shift funds, even sell property, and all of it would legally look like you did it. The real question is, did he strong-arm you into signing? I thought back to that night. The warm firelight, the laughter of the family, Steve's smooth talk about me finally enjoying life. Not exactly force, more like manipulation. He made it sound like he was doing me a kindness. Jim scribbled another note. And you didn't get a chance to review the documents? No independent counsel? Neither, I admitted. Michelle told me they'd already had lawyers draft everything. I just signed where she pointed. Jim's eyebrows shot up. Interesting. Very interesting. He rose from his chair and pulled a thick folder with my name from the filing cabinet. Here's what happens next. I'll make some calls this afternoon. I want to review the exact wording of this power of attorney. I also want to know what Steve's next steps might be. What kind of calls? I asked. First, the firms that probably prepared this. There aren't many in town that handle this kind of paperwork, and they all know me. Then I'll check with your bank, your business partners, and the property managers. If Steve is moving fast, we need to get ahead of him. I nodded. For the first time since the cabin, I felt like I wasn't standing on quicksand anymore. What else should we do? For the moment, nothing rash, Jim said, settling back into his chair. We gather intelligence, map out your legal ground, and prepare options. But you need to understand, if your son is going where I think he is, we may need to take strong defensive action. Like what? Freezing accounts, contesting the power of attorney in court, and if we find proof of fraud or coercion, potentially pressing criminal charges. His eyes met mine. Are you ready for a fight like that, with your own son? I turned toward the office window, watching people hurry along the busy sidewalk, everyone wrapped up in their ordinary lives. Jim, I built something from nothing over 30 years that I won't stand by and let anyone, family or not, tear it down with lies. Jim nodded firmly. Good. Then I'll start making those calls. An hour later, I was pulling into my driveway. My house looked the same as ever. The red brick I chose because it reminded me of the home I grew up in, the oak trees I planted when Steve was a boy, the wraparound porch I added for family cookouts. But something felt different. The place already seemed claimed. Steve's car was in my spot, parked like a flag on conquered ground. Inside, I found him lounging in my favorite chair, phone to his ear. He wrapped up his call quickly when he saw me. Dad, How was the drive? His tone was cheerful, but his eyes gave him away. He looked at me the way a landlord sizes up a tenant about to move out. Fine, I said flatly. I'll need some time to pack. Of course, of course. Take as long as you need, he said, spreading his arms like he was already the new master of the house. I know this is a big step. Michelle walked in from the kitchen with a mug of coffee, the mug I'd bought years ago on a Colorado trip. She gave me that polished smile she used whenever she was angling for something. We were just talking about how to make this easier for you, she said sweetly. We found a few senior living communities that might be perfect. Great amenities, social activities, no house maintenance. Senior living. I was 68, still strong, still working, and they were already trying to shelf me like a worn-out tool. That's kind of you, I said evenly, but I'll handle my own living situation. I climbed the stairs to my room. Every step weighed more than the last. This was the house I had designed myself, chosen every fixture, hammered every nail. And here I was, packing a suitcase like a guest checking out. As I folded clothes and pulled documents together, memories hit me harder than I expected. I thought of teaching Steve to ride a bike in the driveway, his scraped knees, his grin when he finally found balance. Dad, did you see? Did you see me do it? He'd shouted. That boy had been proud to make me proud. Where had he gone? I packed light, just essentials, a few papers, some family photos. Downstairs, I could hear Steve and Michelle's voices carrying easily through the house I'd built for perfect acoustics. Easier than we expected. He's practically doing it himself. Deed should be transferred by Friday. Every word was another nail in the coffin, but I stayed calm, methodical. I took only what was mine and left the rest. 45 minutes later, I came down with a single suitcase. They were waiting near the door, faces arranged into fake concern. That's all you're taking? Michelle asked, eyeing the bag. For now, I said. Steve stepped closer, extending his hand. For a moment, I almost thought he'd show some regret. But no, it was the cold grip of a man who thought he'd just won the jackpot. This is the right move, Dad, he said confidently. Now you can enjoy retirement without the stress. I shook his hand, met his eyes. Take care of the place, I said quietly. As I walked to my truck, I could see them framed in the doorway of my house. Michelle leaned against him, both of them grinning like thieves celebrating a perfect job. Steve even gave me a little wave, like I was just an old buddy, heading down the road. I started the engine and drove off, watching the home disappear in the rearview mirror. They thought they'd pulled off the con of a lifetime. They thought they'd beaten me. But they were wrong. They'd just set the board for a game they had no idea how to play. And I had 30 years of experience teaching men what happens when they underestimate me. The process was only beginning. The phone rang at 7:30 the next morning, just as I was finishing my motel coffee. The Riverside Inn wasn't anything fancy, dated wallpaper, a chair that creaked if you leaned too far, but it was clean, quiet, and mine for as long as I needed it. Jim's voice came through the line, brisk and energized, the way lawyers sound when they've spotted a loophole big enough to drive a truck through. I could practically hear him smiling. Morning. I hope you got some rest, because I've got news you're going to want to hear. I set my mug down and leaned back in the stiff chair. His energy was contagious, like a foreman discovering that the last guy had cut corners on every joint and beam. Go on, I said. First off, the power of attorney your son had drawn up. It's riddled with problems. Whoever prepared it either didn't know state law or figured you'd never have a real lawyer look it over. A grin tugged at my mouth. Jim had that sharp tone in his voice, the one that usually meant someone else's life was about to get complicated. What kind of problems? The biggest? No neutral witnesses. In this state, when a power of attorney involves assets over a certain amount, you need two witnesses who aren't beneficiaries. Guess who signed as witnesses? He let out a short laugh. Steve and Michelle. That one detail alone invalidates the whole thing. You're serious? I don't joke about sloppy lawyering, he replied. Then his voice shifted, losing the humor. And that's not the only thing I found. I sat up straighter. All right, tell me. Your son's already been shopping around. Last week he called 3 different real estate agents asking for market evaluations on 2 of your rental properties. That was before he even brought this up at the cabin. The betrayal hit me like a steel beam to the chest. He hadn't just acted on impulse, he'd been laying this out behind my back for weeks, maybe longer. The birthday party, the friendly talk, the pitch about retirement, all a performance. And there's more, Jim pressed on, his voice now carrying that relentless rhythm of a man building an airtight case. He's contacted your insurance provider to get himself listed as a primary beneficiary on your business policy, and he's been in talks with commercial lenders about using your properties as collateral for some new venture of his. I stood, pacing to the motel window. Outside, the city stretched out, streets, storefronts, office buildings, many of which bore the work of my own company. I had built half this town, brick by brick. How do you know all this? I asked. Because this is a small city and I've been around a long time. Your banker, Pete Morrison, rang me personally last night, said Steve was leaning on him to speed up account transfers. Pete wanted to confirm everything before he acted. I could hear the satisfaction in Jim's tone, like a craftsman proud of his work. Pete Morrison, I'd known him 2 decades, helped finance his first house, a good man, steady as concrete. So what do we do next? I asked. Step 1. We file an emergency injunction today. That locks up all your accounts and properties until the court reviews this power of attorney. Steve won't be able to touch a thing. Jim's voice carried the confidence of someone who'd pulled this move more than once. The thought of Steve finding out his golden plan had just slammed into a brick wall brought the first real smile to my face in days. And after that? Then we challenged the document in court. Fraud, coercion, improper execution, you name it. With the witness problem alone, we'll win easily. Once that's in motion, we'll also ask the court for a restraining order preventing him from trying this again. Jim sounded almost cheerful, like a man unpacking a brand new toolbox. And if Steve pushes back? Jim's laugh was short and cold. Then we turn up the heat. Elder abuse laws here have teeth. Trying to trick a parent into signing power of attorney for personal gain can bring criminal charges. And if we can show he was moving to sell assets for himself, that's theft by deception. I felt something steady settle inside me. Not joy, not revenge, but a sense of justice beginning to take shape. How long before this takes effect? The injunction is practically immediate. Within hours of filing, the hearing to challenge the document should be scheduled within a week. Your son's about to learn that cutting legal corners can get very, very expensive. 2 hours later, I was sitting in the lobby of the Riverside Inn, flipping through the morning paper, waiting. Jim had filed the injunction right at 9 o'clock. By my watch, Steve would be finding out about his frozen accounts right about now. My phone started buzzing not long after the injunction went through. Steve's number lit up the screen. I let it roll to voicemail. 30 seconds later, it rang again. Then again. By 10:30, I was staring at 8 missed calls and 3 text messages. The first came at 10:15. Dad, there's some issue with the bank. Call me. I could almost hear the uncertainty in his voice, the first fracture in that wall of confidence he liked to wear. The next, at 10:22, they're telling me the accounts are frozen. This must be a mistake. Panic was starting to creep in now, eating away at his surety. The last one hit at 10:28, written in all caps, Dad, pick up your phone. It was nothing but desperation. I switched the phone off and ordered another cup of coffee. When I turned it back on an hour later, there were 14 new missed calls and 7 more texts waiting. Reading them in order was like watching a man slide down a muddy hill, anger, bargaining, pleading, all in quick succession. Dad, whatever you think is going on, we can settle this. The lawyers say you filed something in court. This is crazy. Please, call me. Michelle's losing it. We can't get into any of the accounts. People are starting to ask questions. This is wrecking the company. You're wrecking your own company. Fine. You want hardball? We'll see you in court. And finally, Dad, please. I'm your son. We're family. Each message was another step down from confidence to pure panic. It was like watching someone realize their grand house was built on sand. I saved every one of them and forwarded the lot to Jim. That evidence always comes in handy. At 2 p.m, the call came from Michelle. I let it ring twice, 3 times, then picked up. What did you do? Her voice was high, sharp, the sweetness stripped away. She sounded like she'd just watched the walls of her plan collapse. Steve can't even pay the office rent. Hello, Michelle. I said evenly, leaning back in my chair in the motel lobby. I could practically taste her panic through the receiver. "How's your day going?" "This isn't funny," she shrieked. "You locked us out of everything. The business is frozen solid." "Funny word you chose," I said, enjoying her gasps for breath. "Frozen. Paralyzed. That's exactly what I felt yesterday when my own son told me to pack my things and leave my home." "That's not, we didn't mean." Her voice faltered. She was scrambling, trying to put a nice coat of paint on what had been nothing but theft. "You know what's strange, Michelle?" I went on. "I spent 30 years putting up something strong, something that could weather any storm, and I never once thought the storm would come from inside my own family." I could hear Steve barking in the background, ordering her to hang up. She ignored him, too rattled to think straight. "What do you want?" she asked finally, her voice small, shaky, broken down to its frame. "Right now, I want to finish my paper. Maybe walk around town. See some of the buildings I poured my sweat into. Funny thing, when you're not worried about scheming children, you suddenly have a lot more free time." "We weren't stealing," she tried weakly. "Michelle," I cut her off, my tone the same cold edge I used when a subcontractor thought he could swap in cheap materials. "There's a difference between renovation and demolition. What you and Steve were trying to pull, that was demolition." The line went quiet except for her ragged breathing. "And here's the thing about demolition," I added, watching people pass outside the window, calm as I'd felt in weeks. "It only works if you know the structure. And I'm the one who designed this structure from the ground up." I hung up before she could answer, cutting off what sounded like the start of a sob. By evening, the phone had logged 26 missed calls and 15 more texts. The shift was plain as day. Anger at first, then bargaining, now begging. My favorite was the one that landed at 5:47 p.m. "Dad, I screwed up. Can we please just talk?" The bravado was gone. The arrogant man who'd tossed me out of my own home was now a child again, staring at the wreckage he'd made. I deleted them all without reading further, poured a glass of whiskey from the bottle I'd picked up across the street, and settled in to watch the evening news. Tomorrow, Jim would file the next round of paperwork. Tomorrow, Steve would learn that tricking your father into signing power of attorney isn't just invalid, it's criminal. But tonight I was going to enjoy the silence. Well, almost silence. The steady buzzing of a phone I had no intention of answering was the sweetest background noise I'd heard in years. The knock came at 6:30 on Friday morning. I'd been waiting for it. Through the peephole, I saw Steve and Michelle in the hallway. They looked like hell. Steve, who normally couldn't stand to leave the house without a pressed shirt and a clean shave, was rumpled, stubbled, eyes hollow from sleepless nights. Michelle stood a step behind him, her expensive clothes wrinkled, her makeup smeared, looking more like a frightened child than the polished woman who'd tried to sell me out days earlier. I let them stand there for a beat before opening the door. "Well, well," I drawled. "Look what wandered in." "Dad, please." Steve's voice was raw, desperate, stripped of all the swagger he'd once carried. "We need to talk. Things have gotten out of hand." I leaned casually against the frame, making no move to let them in. Michelle clutched at his sleeve, her manicured nails digging into the fabric. She looked terrified. "Out of hand?" I raised my eyebrow. "Son, we're only just breaking ground. You might want to check your phone. I think you've got a few new messages." Steve fumbled for his phone, hands shaking. I watched his expression morph from confusion to dread as he scrolled. What is this?" His voice cracked like a boy going through puberty. "That," I said evenly, "is the sound of chickens coming home to roost. Looks like your workers realized their checks bounced. The subs are asking why they haven't been paid. And that Morrison job? The client called this morning. Something about breach of contract." Michelle whimpered. "But we can fix it. We just need access to the accounts." "The same accounts you tried to rip from me?" I cut in. She flinched at the sharpness in my tone. "Those are staying locked until the court sorts through your little fraud attempt." Their phones started buzzing in tandem, back to back, like a hive of angry wasps. Steve glanced at his screen, and his face drained of what little color he had left. "Let me guess," I said. "Rick from the concrete outfit? He gets testy when he's shorted. And maybe Jenny from the office. She's got 2 kids and a mortgage. I bet she's real happy about a missed paycheck." "Dad," You don't get it, Steve said, nearly begging. If payroll isn't met, the crew walks. We'll lose everyone. The business won't survive. Now you're starting to understand, I told him, savoring each word. Funny how fast things fall apart when you can't play with money that isn't yours. Michelle stepped forward, mascara streaking her cheeks. We'll undo it. The papers, the house, everything. Just unfreeze the accounts. Steve will lose everything. Everything? I tilted my head. You mean like I was about to lose everything when you told me to pack up my life and leave my own house? That kind of everything? Steve's phone lit up again, and this time he answered. Rick, listen, there's been a mistake. I could hear Rick's fury pouring out of the speaker, every word clear, even from across the room. 23 grand, Steve. My crew worked overtime, and now you're telling me the check bounced? I've got mouths to feed. It's a banking issue, just a glitch, Steve stammered. Glitch? I've been doing this 20 years, and I've never seen a glitch that freezes every account. You're either broke or running a scam. The call ended abruptly. Steve stared at the dead screen like it had turned to stone in his hand. And that's just the beginning, I said casually, like we were discussing the weather. Wait until the electrician's here and the plumbers and the equipment rental guys. They'll be coming for their machines real quick. Michelle broke down then, crying openly, her mask gone. This is insane. We're family. You can't ruin your own son over a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? I laughed once, cold and humorless. No, Michelle. You and my son tried to gut everything I built. That's not a misunderstanding. That's theft. Steve's phone buzzed with a text. He looked down, went pale as drywall dust. The bank's calling in the business loan, he whispered. They want the full balance by Monday, or they're seizing the collateral. I leaned forward slightly, letting the silence stretch. And which collateral would that be? Steve's voice cracked. The trucks, the equipment, the office building. I nodded slowly. Ah, yes. The office building I personally put up as collateral when I co-signed your loan. The equipment registered in my name. The trucks titled to my company. Funny thing, son. Turns out you never really owned what you thought you did. Michelle suddenly grabbed my arm, her nails pressing into my sleeve. Her voice shook with desperation. Please, we'll do anything. We'll sign whatever you want. Just don't let this ruin everything. I looked down at her hand clinging to me, then back at her streaked face. Anything? I asked. That's interesting, because I've already made a list. Steve lifted his head from his phone, his eyes hollow. What kind of list? The kind that begins with both of you resigning from every single role in my company, effective immediately. I reached into my pocket and unfolded a sheet of paper. Jim prepared this yesterday. It revokes any claim to power of attorney, strips you of all corporate positions, and makes you put in writing that you attempted to defraud me. Steve's voice cracked. If we sign this, we'll have nothing. That's right, I said flatly. Exactly what I was going to have when you tried to kick me out of my own house. Nothing. Strange how the tables turn, isn't it? Michelle's phone buzzed in her hand. She answered with a trembling voice. Hello? Michelle, this is Carol from the office. The insurance company just called. They say our policy's been canceled. My daughter has a doctor's appointment tomorrow. What am I supposed to do? Michelle's face crumpled. She hung up without a word. That, I said, almost pleasantly, would be because no one's paid the premiums. Hard to pay bills when the bank account is locked tight. And I'd bet Carol isn't the only one finding out about it today. Steve's phone rang again. He didn't answer this time, just stared at it as more calls stacked up one after another. His shoulders sank like a man carrying cinder blocks. The Harrison Project, he murmured, his voice small. If payroll doesn't go out, the crews will walk. The client will sue. Everything we've built. You mean everything I built, I cut in. 30 years of reputation, 30 years of keeping promises, and you thought you could cash it all in while tossing me in the trash. Dad, Steve began, then stopped. For the first time, he actually looked at me, not as someone to outmaneuver, but as his father, the man who'd raised him, taught him, carried him through life. I'm sorry, he whispered. For a brief moment, I heard my little boy again, the one who used to trail after me with a toy hammer. I don't know how I became this person. You became this person, I said, my voice steady, the moment you looked at what I built and decided it was yours to take. The moment you saw your father not as the man who gave you everything, but as a hurdle to clear. Michelle fumbled for a pen, her hand shaking. Where do we sign? Right there. I pointed to the lines at the bottom. Resignation, renunciation, admission of fraud, every last word of it. They signed in a rush, scrawling their names like people trying to shore up a collapsing wall. But it was far too late. The collapse was already well underway. Steve handed me the papers. Now what? Now? I folded them neatly and slid them back into my pocket. Now you find out what it feels like to start from nothing. The difference is I clawed my way up with honest work. You'll be starting over while explaining to every man and woman in this town why their paychecks bounced and their trust in you was wasted. Right on cue, their phones started buzzing again. Steve glanced down, then back at me, his face pale. Answer it, I told him. Your people deserve the truth. He picked up with a trembling hand. Jenny? Hey, listen. Her furious voice spilled out loud enough that I could hear it clearly. Steve, what's happening? My paycheck bounced, my mortgage payment bounced, and now I've got overdraft fees piling up. I trusted you. Steve winced, his face crumpling as though she'd struck him. I know. There's been a situation. I'll fix this. Fix it how? Jenny snapped. The bank says all the accounts are frozen. Do we even have jobs next week? Steve's eyes darted to me, silently begging. I just shrugged. I don't know, Jenny, he stammered. I honestly don't know. The line went dead. He lowered the phone slowly. Defeated. 30 years, I said quietly. That's how long it took me to build something strong enough to feed a dozen families. And you tore it down in 4 days. We can rebuild, Michelle said quickly, her voice trembling. We'll start over. We'll work together. No, I said firmly. You'll start over. I already built my empire once. This time I'll be watching from the sidelines while you try to scrape together whatever's left. I stepped back into my motel room and began to close the door. Dad, wait, Steve called after me. What happens now? To us? I paused, holding the door. Now you get the gift you tried to give me. You get to pack your things and move out of a house that was never yours. You get to hunt for new jobs because the company you thought you'd stolen, you're finished there. And you get to look every employee, every client, every contractor in the eye and explain why their loyalty was betrayed. Steve swallowed hard. And after that, I studied him for a long moment. My son, my blood, a man I barely recognized. And for a fleeting second, I felt something close to pity. Then you do what I did 3 decades ago, I told him. You roll up your sleeves and you build something from scratch. But this time you do it with your own name on the line, with your own sweat, your own money, and your own reputation. No shortcuts, no inheritance, no stealing the foundation someone else laid. With that, I shut the door, leaving them stranded in the hallway, 2 broken figures with their buzzing phones and crumbling dreams. Through the thin motel walls, I could still hear Michelle sobbing, her voice sharp with despair, and Steve's frantic attempts to calm the storm of furious employees and contractors on the other end of the line. Justice, I realize, doesn't always come in thunder or fireworks. Sometimes it arrives quietly, sometimes it whispers, and sometimes it sounds exactly like a phone that just won't stop ringing. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. And as always, thank you for watching.